She was dismissed with a smirk and told to sit down, as if her years in the cockpit meant nothing. But when the pilot collapsed during takeoff, the same people who ignored her suddenly looked to her for a miracle. One woman, one flight, and one moment that would force her to choose between staying silent or stepping into the storm she'd sworn she'd never face again. What would you do when no one believes in you? Until it's too late. Before we dive into this unforgettable story, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story might just leave you speechless. Lauren Bishop hadn't touched a yoke in over 2 years, but her hands still twitched like they were ready for it, gripping ghost metal, adjusting flaps in phantom winds. The muscle memory never left, even if the uniform had. She stood near Gate 42 at Houston Liberty International, not out of excitement for where she was going, but because she had finally run out of excuses to avoid flying altogether. That realization burned a little. She adjusted the strap of her leather shoulder bag, heavy, more with memories than contents, and kept her eyes on the blinking board. Flight 914, on time, aisle seat in row 12. She'd chosen it specifically, close enough to the cockpit door to keep it in view, far enough to seem casual. Old habits like that? They died hardest of all. She exhaled slowly and rolled her shoulders. Around her, passengers carried on in their own orbits. Businessmen whispering into headsets, a couple snapping selfies with matching neck pillows, a toddler throwing cereal puffs like confetti. Lauren ignored it all. She'd gotten good at tuning out noise, both around her and inside her head. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun, not military tight anymore, but structured enough to keep a sense of order. She wore jeans, boots, and a slate-gray blouse that fit just right. Nothing about her stood out. Exactly how she liked it. Nobody who looked at her now would guess she once flew C-130S into combat zones with zero visibility and flak thumping against the hull. Nobody would know she used to go by Falcon 1. A gate agent called for boarding, and the crowd stirred like cattle at feeding time. Lauren waited. She always boarded late. Another habit. Easier to scan the people already seated. Faster to identify exits, profile potential threats, and track who was watching whom. 1,000 tiny calculations ran through her mind without conscious effort. She used to run ops off those instincts. Now she just used them to get through TSA without flinching. Group 4 was called her group. She moved with the line, ticket ready, eyes scanning. One of the pilots stood in the galley chatting with the flight attendant. Younger guy, Latino, probably early 30s. She caught part of the exchange. He was cracking a joke about the Denver layover and how he was already dreaming of bourbon and silence. The woman laughed a little too loud. Lauren made a note of the forced energy in his posture, nervous, or just new. As she passed them, Lauren paused. Just half a step. "Hi, I was wondering, would it be all right to say a quick hello to the flight crew?" The first officer turned his head sharply. His smile vanished. "Sorry, ma'am, the cockpit's not open for tours," he said, voice flat, dismissive. "Please take your seat." Lauren didn't flinch. She offered a polite nod and moved past him, hiding the tension in her jaw. She wasn't trying to gawk. She wanted a closer look at the captain. Something about the whole vibe felt off. But it didn't matter. Not anymore. She reached row 12, stowed her bag, and settled into her seat. Aisle. Window seat taken by a college-age girl already watching a rom-com with earbuds in. Middle seat still empty. She adjusted the airflow above her, slid her sunglasses up on her head, and closed her eyes. In the cockpit, behind a sealed door, Captain Eric Walker rubbed his temples with both hands. The headache was pulsing now, a slow drum behind his eyes. His vision had blurred slightly during pre-check, but he pushed through it. Just another flight to Denver. 1 hour, 52 minutes of airtime, and he could sleep it off. He'd done worse on less rest. "You good?" First Officer Jake Collins asked, buckling in. Walker forced a smile. "Peachy." Collins didn't buy it, but he wasn't about to question a man with 20,000 flight hours. That was the unspoken rule. The captain was the rock. Always. Walker's hands moved through the final checklist with the precision of a man who'd done it 1,000 times, which he had. But his left leg was shaking slightly, something he hadn't noticed until now. Maybe too much coffee. Maybe stress. The divorce papers had come in last night, and he hadn't opened them yet. He already knew what they said. Back in row 12, Lauren's eyes drifted open. The pre-flight safety video played overhead, but she wasn't watching it. She focused on the vibrations. The left engine had a rhythm that was just slightly off. Most wouldn't notice. She did. She always had. Across the aisle, a man in khakis sneezed into his elbow. A woman cradled a baby. The middle seat next to Lauren filled with a talkative HR rep from Cincinnati who clearly wanted to network. Lauren gave her a polite nod, then made it obvious she wasn't up for conversation. The plane taxied. Flight attendants moved briskly down the aisle, checking seatbelts and tray tables. The first officer's voice crackled over the speaker, far more chipper than necessary. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 914, non-stop service to Denver. Captain Walker and I will have you in the air shortly. Should be a smooth ride. Weather's clear. Sit back, relax." Lauren heard none of it. She was watching the cockpit door. It closed, sealed. She shifted in her seat. The plane accelerated. She leaned back, but her fingers dug into the armrest with an unconscious tension. Then, 10 seconds after the wheels left the tarmac, something happened. A stutter. A momentary wobble in the aircraft's climb, not enough to set off alarms, but enough to make Lauren's gut twist. She'd felt it before. That heartbeat of hesitation in the thrust, like the aircraft had just realized something was wrong, but hadn't decided how bad yet. In the cockpit, Captain Walker blinked twice. The lights on the panel blurred, his chest tightened. He tried to call out, but the words came thick, syrupy. Then darkness. His hands slipped from the yoke, and his body slumped to the side. The aircraft pitched. Alarms didn't go off yet. Collins swore under his breath, gripping the controls with both hands. "Captain? Eric?" No response. He fought the tilt, hands scrambling across the autopilot settings, eyes darting between instruments, panic already crawling up his spine. Back in the cabin, the motion was slight, but real. People looked up. The turbulence light blinked on. A baby began to cry. Lauren's eyes locked on the ceiling panel. Her chest rose, once, slow. She knew. The middle-aged man across the aisle chuckled nervously. "Pilot hit a pothole?" Lauren unbuckled her belt without answering. One of the flight attendants, blonde, mid-40s, hurried up the aisle. She was pale. Lauren stood. They made eye contact. The attendant hesitated. Then, "Do you have flight experience?" Lauren didn't speak. She just nodded once and followed her down the aisle. No questions, no time. Only the door between her and the storm ahead. The cockpit door was already ajar when Lauren reached it. The flight attendant had been knocking, her voice hushed and urgent, but now she stepped aside, letting Lauren through without protocol or permission. In the tight space beyond, chaos was unfolding. Captain Walker was slumped against the side panel, his face pale, eyes fluttering. His headset dangled from one ear. His right hand was still twitching over the throttle, as if muscle memory hadn't quite caught up with unconsciousness. First Officer Collins was visibly rattled. His fingers danced across switches with too much speed and too little aim. The plane was level, for now, but the climb had stalled, and turbulence from altitude shift was beginning to make the aircraft shudder. Collins turned sharply when he saw Lauren. "Who the hell are you?" "Lauren Bishop," she said, calm but firm. "Former military pilot. Over 2,000 hours logged in C-130S. I was told you needed help." He stared at her, disbelief and desperation warring on his face. For a second, she thought he'd argue, but he looked at the captain, then at the blinking altimeter, and stepped aside. "Take right seat," he said. "We're climbing slow. I've got him stabilized for now, but I can't." He gestured helplessly at the panel. Lauren didn't hesitate. She slipped into the co-pilot's chair, fastened the belt, and assessed the instrument panel with a trained eye. The layout was different from her old bird, sleeker, digital, more commercial, but the fundamentals hadn't changed. Flight is flight. Thrust is thrust. Altitude still obeys physics. She toggled the intercom. "This is Bishop in the right seat," she said, her voice steady. "We're assuming dual control." She glanced at Collins. He nodded. "I've got communication," he muttered, reattaching his headset. Lauren's fingers slid to the yoke. She took a long breath. Then the world shrank to gauges and numbers and the thrum of engines. In the cabin, confusion had turned into whispers. The brief lurch during climb-out had left some passengers wide-eyed, gripping armrests and glancing toward the sealed door. The flight attendants had resumed walking the aisles, faces composed but forced. In row 12, the woman who'd taken the middle seat, Janet, she'd said her name was, leaned into the aisle, whispering, "Is something wrong?" A man across from them was already scrolling through flight radar on his phone. Lauren's bag sat abandoned under the seat, her ID still zipped inside, her past inching its way into the present by the minute. Back in the cockpit, Lauren was trimming the stabilizer. "Throttle is uneven," she said. "Left engine's oscillating slightly. Not enough to trip alarms, but we'll feel it on descent." "Yeah," Collins mumbled. "I noticed something off on pre-flight, but hell, it wasn't that obvious." "Should have grounded it," Lauren said flatly, but not unkindly. "Captain said it was a sensor glitch. I didn't want to override him." Lauren glanced sideways at him. The kid was too green to be flying solo. His hands were still trembling. "Focus now," she said, locking back into the climb schedule. "We get her stable, we communicate, then we plan descent." Collins swallowed hard, but nodded. He wiped a palm on his pants and returned to the comms panel. Lauren reached across and gently moved the captain's limp arm from the throttle quadrant. He moaned slightly, still not fully conscious. "Keep him monitored," she said. "If he wakes up, we'll need vitals. Blood sugar maybe, heart's probably stressed." Outside, the clouds parted slightly as they leveled off at cruising altitude. The autopilot kicked in with a soft chime. Lauren let go of the yoke but kept her hands hovering, ready. She could feel the sweat along her spine now. The cockpit, sealed and humming, had the heat of tension baked in. "You flew C-130S?" Collins asked, almost like a whisper. Lauren didn't look at him. "Yeah." "Gone back?" She nodded. "Iraq. Afghanistan. A few places I can't pronounce. What brought you here?" She hesitated, then adjusted a setting on the heading. "I stopped flying after an op went south. Wrong call at the wrong time. Men died. I grounded myself after that." Collins didn't respond for a moment. "Then why'd you get on this flight?" "Because fear isn't a place I want to live," she said. "I needed to see if I could sit in the sky without falling apart." "Looks like you got promoted to a cockpit instead." Lauren finally gave a dry smile. "Yeah, funny how that works." There was a pause. Then Collins said, "I was top of my class, technically, but I've never had something like this happen. I mean, he just passed out, no warning. What do we do if he doesn't wake up?" Lauren looked at him then, not the way a civilian would, not with pity, but like a soldier studying a junior who just met war face to face. "We do what we're trained to do. We fly the bird, we land it, we make sure everyone walks off." Collins nodded, more to himself than her. "Right," he murmured. "Right." Lauren leaned back slightly, finally letting her gaze rest on the captain's unconscious form. He was still breathing, shallow and rhythmic, but his color worried her. She reached for the intercom again. "Flight deck to cabin," she said. "We need a medically trained passenger to assist with the captain, preferably someone with cardiac or emergency experience." A moment later, a flight attendant's voice came back. "We're bringing a nurse, row 19, coming now." Lauren nodded, then scanned the flight path. "Denver's expecting us in an hour and 20, Collins said. "What do you want to do?" She tapped the screen, switching to flight control frequencies. "Tell the tower we're requesting a priority approach," she said. "We may need to expedite descent depending on the captain's condition." "You think he'll make it?" "I think we should be ready if he doesn't." The nurse arrived a minute later, a woman in her 50s with a firm tone and calm eyes. She introduced herself as Susan and immediately set to checking vitals, requesting the emergency kit from the crew. As Susan worked, Lauren refocused. The panels glowed softly. Altitude was steady. Engine 2 still pulsed with that minor vibration, but the systems were holding. She allowed herself one small exhale, the kind that lived between survival and control. Then she looked forward, toward the sky outside the glass. The bird was flying, and she was in the seat again. Captain Walker's lips were turning the color of ash. The nurse's voice was low, steady, but laced with urgency. She had a stethoscope on his chest and a blood pressure cuff wrapped tightly around his arm. Collins handed her a bottle of water and a packet of aspirin from the emergency kit. He was sweating, trying to keep his hands from shaking again. Lauren didn't need to look back to know the nurse's prognosis wasn't good. She could hear it in the clipped rhythm of her instructions. "Your rewarded amount in time of..." "He's dehydrated, heart rate is irregular, shallow respirations. Could be cardiac syncope," the nurse muttered, slipping a nasal cannula around the captain's face. "Or worse, you need to get him on the ground soon." Lauren didn't respond. She was reading the airspeed and checking wind speeds through the touchscreen display, recalculating everything in her head. The coordinates for emergency airports were already lining up in her mental grid. The captain wasn't going to be flying anything today, maybe not ever again. Collins glanced at her and swallowed hard. "We're closest to Amarillo if we need to divert." Lauren gave him a single nod. "Keep it in your pocket. We'll see what happens in the next 10. The aircraft held steady at 31,000 feet. Outside, the sky was open and calm, deceptively so. In the cabin, passengers felt none of what was happening on the other side of the door. Not the tension, not the heat rising in Lauren's throat, not the sheer weight of what it meant to be back in the seat she'd sworn she'd never occupy again. She hadn't thought about flying since the mission in Kandahar. She hadn't let herself. But her hands remembered. Her breathing remembered. And something inside her, a locked-away, coiled instinct, had kicked open the door the second she touched the controls. Lauren leaned forward, staring into the horizon light. "We'll stay on course for Denver," she said, mostly to herself, "unless he crashes before descent. If that happens, we pivot, hard." Collins stared at her. "You say that like it's a drill." She looked at him sideways. "That's because I've lived through worse drills than this." The nurse suddenly spoke from behind. "His pulse is fading. It's intermittent." Lauren took a breath through her nose and tapped the comm switch. "Flight deck to ATC, requesting medical emergency response upon arrival in Denver, code red. Unconscious pilot with unstable vitals, 2 souls at controls. Current heading and altitude stable." The reply came back seconds later, all clipped urgency and static. "Copy that. Flight 914, you are priority inbound. Confirm souls on board." Collins answered, his voice finally finding its command tone. 175 passengers, 6 crew. Requesting straight-in vector for runway 34 left. Advise emergency protocol staging. Confirmed. Emergency vehicles will be waiting. Maintain current flight level. Report any deviation. Lauren clicked off the mic and sat back slightly. Her eyes drifted toward the oxygen masks stowed above, then toward the sky. There was always a quiet hum, a pulse to the air at this height. It used to calm her. Now it just made her listen harder for anything out of sync. Collins shifted beside her. "Can I ask something?" he said, after a long beat. "You can try." He hesitated. "Why'd you stop?" She didn't answer right away. Her fingers ran along the trim wheel, adjusting slightly as the nose dipped half a degree. "Because I made the right call," she said softly, "and people still died." His jaw clenched. He didn't press further. There was silence between them, except for the instruments, the soft chatter of air traffic control, and the subtle tremor in the left engine that hadn't gone away. Lauren could feel the question in the silence. Are we going to make it? The nurse stood and leaned into the doorway. "He's not responsive. I don't know how much longer we've got him." "Understood," Lauren said, then louder to Collins. "Get Denver back on the line. I want a shorter descent profile. Tell them we'll need a medical crew at the gate and clearance for emergency taxi." Collins complied. His voice was stronger this time. He was finding his footing. Crisis had a way of either breaking you or forging you fast. Lauren adjusted the flaps slightly and ran a systems check. The bird was flying steady, but she wasn't taking anything for granted. The margin of error at 500 miles per hour was thinner than the line between calm and panic, and in a few minutes that altitude was going to start dropping. She could already feel it, the weight of the descent. In the passenger cabin, the tension had grown. People noticed the attendant walking briskly up the aisle again, noticed the subtle way she leaned toward a man near the back row and whispered something. A few had pulled out their phones and were checking news feeds for flight updates. Someone near the front asked if the pilot had passed out. The whisper grew legs. Janet, in row 12, leaned to the man across the aisle. "Did you see that woman earlier? She got up when the flight attendant asked for help. Do you think she's flying the plane?" The man shrugged, uneasy. "Hope she knows what she's doing." Back in the cockpit, Lauren moved through the final checklist for descent. Her voice was focused, measured. Altimeter set, weather check. Wind 290 at 6, visibility clear. Runway 34L confirmed. Approach path? Direct. No holes. They've cleared all other traffic. Lauren gave a nod. "Let's bring it home." Her hands tightened around the yoke. For the first time in 2 years, she was descending. Every inch they dropped brought back pieces she tried to bury. The sound of rotors over sand, the echo of a mayday call, the stillness after the blast. But now, she wasn't losing altitude alone, and she wasn't powerless. She was in the seat. And this time, she was going to land the damn thing. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft began its slow, deliberate descent. No announcement had been made yet. No one had officially told the passengers that the captain was unconscious, or that a civilian had taken over the right seat, but people knew. They always knew. It was in the way the attendants moved now, brisk, quiet, with purpose. It was in the silence that had crept across the rows, replacing the usual buzz of small talk with something taut, expectant. Lauren felt the change too. Even from the cockpit, the shift in the cabin was tangible, like static in the air. Her fingers stayed wrapped around the yoke, the vibration of the aircraft running through her bones like an old rhythm waking up. The descent wasn't steep, but it was tight, a calculated glide slope that had to account for wind shear, air traffic, and the lingering instability in Engine 2. Behind her, the nurse was still monitoring Captain Walker, adjusting the oxygen flow and rechecking his pulse every few minutes. Susan had barely spoken since reporting his vitals had dropped again. Lauren hadn't asked for an update. She didn't need one. She'd already decided Walker wasn't coming back online before touchdown. Collins shifted in his seat, his voice steady now as he communicated with Denver approach. "Flight 914 inbound. descending through 21,000. Emergency priority status still active. Copy that, 914. Maintain present course and altitude. You're cleared for straight-in approach to runway 34L. Ground unit standing by. Let us know if conditions change. Lauren adjusted the throttle just slightly and tapped the flap control. Start prepping for final, she said quietly. He hesitated. You want me to take controls? No. I've got it. He nodded and returned to the panel. At 18,000 feet, the city finally came into view, a shimmer of lights spreading across the Colorado plain. To anyone else, it might have looked peaceful. To Lauren, it was a landing zone and nothing more. She wasn't here to admire the view. She was here to deliver every one of those passengers safely to the ground, no matter what she had to relive to get there. You sure you're okay? Collins asked, glancing at her. Not just physically, I mean, I'm fine, she said, too quickly. He didn't ask again. Truth was, she wasn't fine, not even close. Every second in that seat pulled ghosts from the corners of her mind. The last time she flew under pressure, the mission had ended in smoke and blood and radio silence. She remembered the static in her ears when her wingman stopped responding. She remembered the way the cargo bay filled with dust and screams and something much worse than failure. She remembered surviving and wishing she hadn't. But this was different. This wasn't a war zone. These weren't soldiers in the back. These were families, tourists, students, people going home, people leaving it, and every one of them was counting on someone they hadn't even seen before boarding. She adjusted the descent rate again. Collins scanned the cabin camera, which showed the forward aisle, dim and calm. Still quiet back there, he said. No sign of panic. They won't panic, Lauren replied. Not if we land clean. She checked the fuel. The reserve was steady, no leaks. The engine issue hadn't worsened. It was manageable. For now. The air grew heavier the closer they got. The pressure shifted subtly, pressing into their chests, into their words. Lauren clicked on the intercom. She had avoided it until now. But with 15 minutes to wheels down, the silence needed breaking. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your flight crew, she said, keeping her voice even, strong. As some of you may have noticed, we've had an unexpected situation on board. Our captain is currently unable to continue the flight. I've stepped in to assist as a licensed pilot with military flight experience. We are now in final approach to Denver International and have been cleared for emergency priority landing. Please remain calm, remain seated, and follow all crew instructions. We are trained for this and we will land safely. She let go of the mic and sat back, watching the sky begin to fold inward as the aircraft slipped lower through layers of dusk-lit cloud. The city lights were brighter now, arranged in perfect grids, like a glowing invitation. Collins blinked at her. You handled that well. She didn't answer. Her mind was already 15 miles ahead, calculating crosswind angles and mentally walking through the approach checklist again. The call button chimed from the galley behind them. Susan stepped up beside Lauren, her voice low. His breathing's slowing. If you can get us down in 10, he might still have a chance. Lauren met her eyes for half a second. We'll be down in 9. At 8,000 feet, Lauren disengaged the autopilot. The yoke hummed under her hands. She took full manual control and angled into the approach vector. The airport tower was guiding them clean. No traffic ahead. Runway 34L was theirs alone. Collins leaned forward. Gear down. Lauren flicked the lever. The familiar thunk echoed through the frame as the landing gear locked into position. Flaps 30, she said. He reached over and complied. The wing edges curved down, grabbing air. They descended through 5,000 feet. Lauren could feel the wind shift now, a faint tailwind curling into a cross. I'll call you to other it, she said. I see it, Collins replied, compensating for drift. The runway lights appeared like a strip of clarity in the distance. Lauren narrowed her focus. The time for thinking was over. Now it was only hands and breath and instinct. "Speed?" she asked. "Pools, on most 48 knots, Collins replied. "Stable." "Altitude?" 3,000, on glide. They dropped another 1,000 in the span of seconds. The wheels were down, the flaps were full. The aircraft began its final slope toward Earth. The entire plane was silent now. In row 12, Janet clutched her armrest with both hands, lips moving in a quiet prayer. Others sat rigidly upright, eyes closed, as if sheer willpower could help guide the aircraft down. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was trust, unspoken and fragile. Lauren felt it pressing against her spine. 1,000 feet. The lights of the runway grew larger, stretching ahead like a promise. "Steady," she murmured. Collins kept his gaze on the instruments. 500 feet. Lauren eased back slightly, nose trimming upward. The crosswind nudged the left wing. She compensated with a subtle roll. 200 feet. The wheels aligned. 100. Bend. The rear wheels touched first, soft, controlled. The front gear kissed the runway half a second later. The brakes deployed. The thrust reversers roared. The aircraft slowed. Lauren guided it cleanly down the center line, eyes forward, yoke steady in her hands. No bounce, no jolt. Just a smooth, perfect landing. She exhaled for the first time in 10 minutes. Collins let out something between a laugh and a sob. Tower came through. "Flight 914, welcome to Denver. Emergency crews are en route." Lauren clicked the mic. "Tell them to move fast. The captain needs immediate medical." Then she pulled back from the yoke, leaned her head against the seat, and closed her eyes. She'd done it. They were on the ground, and every soul on board was still breathing. The wheels had barely stopped rolling when the first emergency vehicle pulled alongside the aircraft. Red and white lights danced against the cabin windows, and a wave of motion surged from the front of the plane to the back. For the first time since takeoff, there was audible relief. Gasps, quiet sobs, a ripple of conversation too loud to be called a whisper, but too awestruck to be noise. Lauren sat still. The yoke was no longer in her hands, but her fingers remained curled like it was. Her breathing had slowed, but her pulse hadn't. Not yet. There was a strange stillness inside her, the kind that follows chaos and comes right before memory claws its way to the surface. Collins unbuckled first. He stood up too quickly, swaying slightly, and grabbed the overhead panel to steady himself. His face was pale, streaked with sweat, and his eyes had the glassy, overexposed look of someone who'd seen too much, too fast. But his voice was clear. "They're on the jetway now," he said. "They've got a stretcher coming." Lauren nodded. She reached down to unclip her belt, but paused as the weight of her service returned in full. For a moment, the cockpit wasn't the clean, modern console of a commercial jet. It was the clattering bones of a military bird flying low through hostile airspace. She could smell cordite, hear the thudding rhythm of rotors, feel the pressure of lives depending on her. She blinked and the images vanished. Just like that. Gone. She stood slowly. Her knees ached. Maybe from tension, maybe from the past. Collins moved aside as the medics filed in, 2 men, a woman, all in dark uniforms with bright neon piping. Susan stepped back to let them in. She handed one of them the clipboard she'd filled out, gave a brief report, then turned and looked at Lauren. "He is stable," Susan said softly. "But if we'd been in the air 5 more minutes..." Lauren didn't let her finish. She didn't need to hear it. She already knew. They watched as the medics lifted Captain Walker from the seat, securing his head and chest, feeding IV lines, checking monitors. His face was ashen, but no longer lifeless. His chest moved. That was something. Collins stepped into the galley, away from the noise. Lauren followed. They stood in the narrow passage, wedged between jump seats and compartments, out of sight but not out of earshot. Outside the cockpit, applause was breaking out. Spontaneous, raw, rolling down the cabin like a wave of disbelief, finally crashing. Neither of them said anything. Not until Collins turned and looked her in the eyes. "You just saved 181 people," he said. Lauren let out a dry breath. "I didn't do it alone." "You did more than I did," he said. "No. You didn't freeze, you didn't run, you stayed with me." He nodded slowly, unsure how to accept it. The flight attendants opened the forward door. Fresh air rushed in, cool and sharp, cutting through the lingering cabin heat. Paramedics guided the stretcher down the aisle. Passengers shifted in their seats, watching silently. Some with tears in their eyes, some with phones pointed, capturing grainy footage of something they couldn't quite explain. A woman in row 4 mouthed "thank you" toward the cockpit door. Lauren looked down at her boots. She hadn't worn a uniform in years, but part of her still stood at attention. "I should say something to them," she muttered. "You don't have to," Collins replied. "I know." She stepped into the open doorway. The first few rows turned toward her like she'd emerged from the clouds. Some clapped again, unsure if they should stop. Some just stared, trying to place her in a world they understood. She wasn't a captain, not technically. She wasn't the flight crew. She wasn't even supposed to be there. But she had been there, exactly when they needed her. Lauren gave a slight nod. "Thank you for your trust," she said, her voice low but steady. "And your patience. I know this wasn't the flight you expected. It wasn't the one I expected either. Exercising is like an SPO act." A soft laugh passed through a few rows. "It helped." She continued. "Captain Walker is in medical care now. He has a strong team with him. We've landed safely, and all of you will be able to disembark shortly. Please follow the crew's instructions, and if you see them again, thank them, too." They stayed calm when it counted. There was another round of applause, warmer now, fuller. This time it wasn't for the miracle of the landing. It was for the quiet, composed woman standing in front of them, speaking like someone who didn't think she had done anything extraordinary. She turned and disappeared back through the curtain. Outside the aircraft, the tarmac shimmered with floodlights and emergency crews. A tight choreography of movement and containment. A man in a reflective vest approached the base of the stairway as the first passengers began to disembark. He was holding a tablet and wore a badge that read, "FAA Field Response." Collins tapped Lauren's shoulder. "They want to speak with you. Debrief, I imagine. Media's probably next." Lauren exhaled and followed him down the stairs. The wind hit her face like a baptism. She'd been sealed inside steel for hours, but this was real air. Cool, unsanitized, full of night and engine smoke and jet fuel. It grounded her in a way nothing else could. She walked across the tarmac like she was back on base, boots solid on the ground, no adrenaline left in her blood. The FAA rep greeted her with a cautious look and held out his hand. "Mom, lead investigator Merrick. We'll need a full statement when you're ready. No rush. First, thank you for what you did." Lauren nodded. She didn't shake his hand. Her fingers still felt too full of vibration and memory. Voice cut through from behind them. "Excuse me? Miss Bishop?" She turned. A reporter stood beyond the caution tape, flanked by two others, camera in hand. "Can you tell us what happened up there? Were you a trained pilot? Are you military?" Questions came all at once, microphones extended, flashbulbs snapped. Lauren didn't move. She looked up at the nose of the plane she'd just landed. Still warm from flight, still marked with her fingerprints on the yoke. She faced the reporters. Her voice didn't shake. "I flew," she said, "because someone had to." And then she walked past them all, through the glare and the noise and the weight of everything that had just unfolded, not as a passenger, and not as a hero, but as a pilot. Again. The hotel room was too quiet. Lauren sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on her knees, staring at the blank television screen like it might flicker to life and distract her from the hum building in her chest. Her bag sat unopened on the floor. She hadn't even bothered to change out of her clothes. The Denver skyline flickered outside the window, but she barely noticed it. She was still landing the plane, over and over, in her head. Even now, hours later, her hands twitched. Her calves ached from holding pressure on the rudder pedals during final approach. Every nerve ending was on high alert, like she'd just walked off the tarmac in Kandahar instead of a domestic runway. There was a knock at the door. She didn't move. Another knock, this time firmer. "Lauren?" "It's Collins." She sighed and stood, unlocking the door. Jake Collins stood in the hallway, holding 2 cups of coffee and a folder under his arm. He looked younger now, out of uniform, hoodie, jeans, sneakers, but the weight in his eyes hadn't gone anywhere. "I figured you weren't sleeping," he said, holding out a cup. She took it wordlessly and stepped aside to let him in. "You shouldn't be here," she said after a beat. "Neither should you," he replied, "but here we are." He sat in the armchair across from the bed, placing the folder beside him. "We just came from the hospital," he said. "Walker's stable. They've got him in ICU, running tests. Doc said it was a cardiac arrhythmia. He blacked out mid-climb and never regained full consciousness. He's lucky we got him down when we did." Lauren nodded. "I figured. Didn't know who landed the plane. Not yet. He'll find out eventually." "Yeah. Probably from the news." She finally took a sip of coffee. It was bad hotel room coffee, burnt, overly bitter, but she welcomed it. The bitterness matched the taste in her mouth since stepping back into the cockpit. That sense of everything old returning in a rush she hadn't asked for. "You want to talk about it?" Collins asked. Lauren arched an eyebrow. "Which part? The part where I broke FAA regs and took control of a commercial aircraft? Or the part where I almost walked away from it again?" He shook his head. "The part where you didn't." She sighed and walked to the window, looking down at the city. "I was grounded 2 years ago," she said. "Voluntarily?" "After an op went south, classified mission, supply drop under fire. I made the call to descend when I should have waited. I thought I had the timing, thought we could get in and out fast." She paused, knuckles whitening on the coffee cup. "We didn't make it. Took a direct hit on approach. My co-pilot bled out in the seat next to me. One of the loadmasters never made it out of the wreckage. I got the rest of them out, but there wasn't enough left of the bird to patch together." Collins sat forward, elbows on his knees, listening without a word. "They called me a hero," she continued, bitterness creeping into her tone. "Said I did the best I could, but they didn't see the hole in the desert, didn't smell what it smelled like, didn't have to write the letters to the families. I grounded myself after that, gave up the wings, figured if I couldn't fly without doubt, I had no business flying at all." The room was silent for a long moment. "But today," Collins said slowly, "you didn't hesitate." "I did," Lauren replied. "In the moment right before I stood up. I was back there, seat 12C, thinking someone else would step up, someone better, someone cleaner." She turned and looked at him, but no one did. "And I was the only one who knew what to do." "That's the definition of courage," he said quietly. She gave a faint smile. "I used to think courage was running into the fire. Now, I think it's sitting in the fire and not letting it burn everything you are." He nodded, then reached for the folder and handed it to her. "Watch this. Flight recorder data. Debrief transcript. You're going to get a call from the NTSB tomorrow, and the airline's already drafting a press release. They're calling you an outstanding example of civilian leadership." Lauren opened the folder, flipped through the documents, then shut it again. "I didn't do it for a headline," she said. "I know," Collins replied. "But you should know, the passengers are starting a petition. They want you formally recognized. Medal, commendation, something." "I didn't do it for a medal either." "No, but sometimes the world needs to remember that not all heroes wear wings on their shoulders. Some just carry them in their bones." Lauren didn't respond. She looked down at the folder, then toward the window again. "I'm not going back," she said, after a long silence. "To flying? To hiding?" She set the coffee on the dresser, picked up the folder again, and tucked it into her bag. "I don't know what's next," she said, "but I know it's not running anymore." Collins stood and nodded. "Well," he said with a faint smile, "when you figure it out, I think the sky will still be there." He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "One more thing," he said. "You might want to check your phone. Last I heard, there were a few thousand messages waiting." He left without another word. Lauren stood there for a long moment, then pulled out her phone. Missed calls, texts, mentions. A dozen news outlets, old colleagues, former commanding officers, even her estranged sister. She sat down on the edge of the bed and scrolled through them, one by one. And for the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel the weight pressing down. She felt something rising. The auditorium lights dimmed slowly, casting the room in a quiet hush. Rows of uniformed personnel and airline staff sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces turned toward the stage. A large projection screen displayed an image of Flight 9014, a white and silver aircraft, wheels down, resting on a Denver runway. The caption beneath it read, "Landed under extraordinary circumstances." Lauren stood in the wings, just behind the curtain, her heart thudding, not from fear, but from something quieter, something heavier. She adjusted the simple black blazer she wore, brushed her palms down her pants, and tried to remember how to breathe like someone who belonged on a stage. She hadn't planned on being here. The invitation from the FAA had come with words like recognition, commendation, and public thanks, all of which had made her want to disappear back into obscurity. But her sister had called, so had half her old unit, and Collins had shown up at her hotel with a suit jacket and a look that said, "You've done harder things than this." So here she was. A podium stood at the center of the stage, draped with a blue cloth bearing the FAA seal. A woman from the National Transportation Safety Board approached the mic. Her tone was reverent but professional as she began the citation. On the morning of May 14th, during a routine flight between Houston and Denver, Flight 914 experienced a critical emergency when the assigned captain became incapacitated during climb-out. What happened next was anything but routine. In the midst of uncertainty and potential disaster, one passenger, a former Air Force pilot, stepped forward and assumed control of the aircraft. With calm precision, she stabilized the flight, coordinated with the remaining flight crew, and successfully navigated a priority landing that saved the lives of 181 individuals. Lauren shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the praise. She had flown under fire before, landed in sandstorms and blackouts, but this had felt like flying through her own broken history. Somehow, that was harder. The official continued, "In recognition of her extraordinary courage, quick thinking, and selfless action, the Federal Aviation Administration and the NTSB are proud to present this Civilian Aviation Heroism Award to Miss Lauren Bishop." A round of applause broke out. Warm, not perfunctory, real. People rose to their feet. A few wiped their eyes. Lauren stepped out into the lights. She wasn't used to applause, not like this. Not when it was quiet and personal. Not when it felt like forgiveness. She walked to the podium, took the plaque with both hands, and nodded once, her eyes scanning the crowd. Collins stood in the back row, arms crossed, a small, proud smile on his face. Her sister was next to him, recording with her phone, even though Lauren had asked her not to. She leaned into the mic. "I don't have much to say that hasn't already been said," she began, voice steady. "But I will say this. Most days, You don't know when you're going to be tested. You don't get a warning. You just get a moment to act, or not. She paused, letting that sit. For 2 years, I believed I had failed one of those moments. I believed that a mistake, even one made with the best of intentions, disqualified me from trust, from flying, from command. But I was wrong. What disqualifies us is refusing to stand up when the moment comes again, when you hear your name called, not by a person, but by circumstance, and you answer anyway. She looked out across the faces, pilots, veterans, civilians, strangers, and nodded. I answered. That's all. And I'm grateful to still be standing here. The room gave another round of applause, not louder than before, but deeper somehow. She stepped down from the stage. Later, at the reception, Lauren stood near a table of miniature cheesecakes and punch, her fingers brushing the edge of the plaque like she didn't know where to put it. People came and went. Flight attendants who had been on 914, passengers who wanted to shake her hand, reporters asking for quotes she didn't feel like giving. She smiled politely, accepted the praise, and kept scanning the room like she was waiting for something. Then she saw him. Captain Walker, in a gray blazer, leaning slightly on a cane, but smiling as he moved through the crowd. His face had regained its color, his posture straighter than she'd expected. He spotted her and approached with surprising ease. "Lauren Bishop," he said with a small smile. "We finally meet." She nodded, offering her hand. He took it gently. "I wanted to say thank you," he continued, "not just for saving the flight, but for stepping in when I couldn't." She tilted her head. "You would have done the same for me." Maybe not as cleanly," he chuckled. "The FAA briefed me. I read the reports. You handled that cockpit like someone who never left it." Her smile dimmed slightly. "I never really did. I just left myself." He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. "It's a hard thing to carry." "It was," she said. "But I don't think it is anymore." They stood in silence for a moment. Two pilots who'd flown through different storms, but landed in the same place. Before he left, he leaned in. "You ever think about coming back?" She gave a short laugh. "You mean commercial? Or the FAA? They're asking about you. People in D.C. want to know if you're interested in flight instruction, crisis training, pilot outreach." She didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "Maybe." He nodded again. "Well, if you do, you've got people behind you." He moved off toward a circle of colleagues. Lauren stood there, still holding her plaque, her cup of untouched punch, and something else. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She was proud, not for surviving, not even for saving the flight, but for showing up again, for letting herself be seen. Later that evening, back in her hotel room, she packed slowly. Her flight home left in the morning, but she wasn't rushing. She folded the blazer with care, set the award in a padded pouch, and zipped the bag closed. She paused at the door, glanced back once, then turned out the light. As she walked down the hallway, her phone buzzed. A message from her sister. "Proud of you." Mom would be too. Lauren smiled. Outside, Denver's sky stretched wide and dark and clear. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was grounded. She felt like she was flying again,